So my theory of change and the client's theory of change are not always and cannot always be the same. I think it is more important to learn the client's theory of change and align with their model rather than my own. If a client is open to my ideas, then I'm happy to share them. A therapeutic alliance and a working relationship between the therapist and the client is the largest predictor of positive outcomes in therapy. Relationship factors contribute 30% to the equation. They are more important than technique and include what is generally known as the core conditions of a therapeutic alliance: empathy, positive regard, warmth, congruence, genuineness, plus a range of other qualities such as sincere respect, trust, caring support, and encouragement. Just as I respect the idiosyncratic worldview of my client and use it during the change process, I respect any views that they have that correspond to a theory from some other counseling model. The individual is autonomous but is influenced by the system. The individual has a role in the equilibrium or dysfunction of the system. The relationship between the individual and the system is bidirectional. The individual has an innate need to self actualize, and the idea of self is developed by social and cultural values. What I do believe is that we can solve a problem, but if we can solve a problem by ourselves, we will. And if a client is reaching out for help, there's a strong chance that the client will already have a basic idea of what needs to change already. I also believe that it is less about what you know, but more about doing what you know. Over pathologizing should be avoided. Many insurance providers will not pay if there is no diagnosis and no evidence based treatment plan. I do not anticipate becoming a therapist so skilled and so reputable that I can charge a cash only premium and only serve those who can afford my services, in which I can run therapy as I see fit, no diagnoses, no treatment goals, whatever. But with that out of the way, I anticipate that solution focused brief therapy will be my primary model of choice. To quote Stephen DeShazer, one of the pioneers of um, solution focused brief therapy, he says that clients judge success very differently than therapists do. What I think is working matters much less than what the client thinks is working. Again, our job is to point clients in the direction of change, not to tell them what to change. We might give them the tools, but they build their own house. Part of the beauty of solution focused brief therapy is that it pivots the perspective for families, for couples, for individuals relatively simply. In the present moment, or moving forward, what does the family, couple, or individual want to focus on? Solution focused therapy relies heavily on the assumption that no problem occurs all of the time. There are exceptions to their seemingly ever present problem. Finding these exceptions and leaning into them is one way to begin to change. Families, couples, and individuals tend to rely on problem solving that does not work. To break these maladaptive cycles, counselors are to follow three rules. If it's not broke, don't fix it. Once you know what works, do more of it. And if something does not work, don't do it again. Do something different. It is the simplicity of these rules that makes them memorable and good for broad applications. In solution focused therapy, I do not necessarily need to know where the client or clients develop their ideas and opinions in the first place. It's true, though, knowing these intimate details will allow me to perhaps access empathy more easily, which is key to forming any kind of connection, but it is not an absolute requirement for solution focused therapy. That said, building trust and rapport should not be ignored, and we shouldn't just immediately jump into problem solving. Okay. Solution focused brief therapy has a distinct advantage in this respect since it recognizes and accepts the client's reality. Finding out about the natural complexities of another individual's unique inner world, their thoughts, feelings, responses to life, requires sincere and focused curiosity, in itself a great rapport builder. Though solution focused therapy is my primary model of choice, I know that flexibility is a key value in delivering appropriate interventions. The structure and interventions are somewhat formulaic in solution focused therapy, but there is room for other more eclectic approaches to be integrated into the framework of SFBT. The flexibility and simplicity allows for its broad applications to families, couples, and individuals. Taking a keen interest in the client's system and their culture can not only earn trust, but also reveal key information that is useful to therapy. Some general practices can do much to mitigate the friction caused by differences in race, class, socio-economic status, gender, sexual orientation, religion, education, age, or disability. We can monitor, review, and reflect on our day in, day out practices to be sure we are not replicating the power relationships of institutional racism in our therapy rooms. So, beyond just acknowledging that it's a problem or could be a problem, self of the therapist work should be ongoing. There is no destination, and the work is continual. With that in mind, my biases and ideas about gender and gender roles will absolutely influence the quality of my services. Whether or not I subscribe to the gender binary concept will affect therapy and how I relate to clients. I'm a cisgender male. One insight I will have to remember is that members of a dominant socially sanctioned group rarely engage in reflection of their dominant identities because they simply do not have to. I have never had to defend my identity, so I may find it harder to connect with a person who does. I would also consider fostering an egalitarian therapeutic relationship with the client while leaving space to take a more authoritarian role should the client benefit from that dynamic. So I won't be using any psychological jargon. I'm not going to blame the client for any lack of improvement or refuse to share knowledge or even educate the client. These acts mystify the process. Okay. Um, some specific interventions that seem to transcend culture, gender, socioeconomic status that I've used in therapy are scaling questions, the miracle question, and exception questions. I've covered exceptions, um, but I want to get more into scaling questions. As far as I know, most people can imagine a scale from 1 to 10. Putting a number to an experience requires some reflection and it's unique to the client. The question might sound like, how can we take your anxiety, which you rated a 7, down to a 6.5? This kind of exploration is aligned with the principle of SFBT, which is that small solutions may lead to larger solutions and may have nothing to do with the problem itself. However, as a practitioner of solution focused brief therapy, using scaling questions to measure solutions rather than the problem is actually more in line with the modality. There will be problems, but a more accurate statement would be that there will always be change. And it is our relationship with the constant of change where we might exert a degree of, of control or a modicum of agency. I worked with a female client who was the daughter of Indian immigrant parents. Her parents and culture played a large role in her values, particularly when it came to mental illness. Mental illness was generally not discussed within her family system, and any problems were dealt with internally, meaning within the family, no outside help. Additionally, there was a tremendous amount of pressure to marry in that particular family system. The cliche in psychotherapy and recovery in general is that we therapists have to meet them where they are at. I see no fault in this piece of wisdom, and I have since integrated it into my own approach. Solution focused therapy became most useful for this client with her original reason for seeing me, which is that which was her addiction to alcohol and cocaine. We avoided concepts like denial and resistance and opted for the language of customer, complainant, and visitor, terms coined by DeShazer um, uh, and Insoo Kimberg, right? So she was a customer, the ideal client, willing to reach a consensus with the counselor regarding the problem and the goal. She could recognize that she played an active role in the problem and the solution. So we began by exploring replacement behavior for her addiction. These behaviors could be categorized as exception behaviors. So then her goal transformed to, I will not drink and do coke anymore, turned into, I will attend 3 AA meetings a week and find a sponsor. The helplessness and hopelessness commonly experienced by those struggling with addiction can be mitigated by shifting the focus onto the solution rather on the way out of the problem, their way out of the misery, rather than on the misery itself.